Mike. Here we go.
I think I need to throw up now.
I keep doing that. I'm sorry, Twyla.
You're listening to the Legion of Reason.
Okay, welcome to episode 196 of the Legion of Reason diversion for March 5th, 2016. Chris and yours truly, the Supreme Reverend Dr. Randy Tyson, are joined by philosopher Stephen Law. Stephen is a professor of philosophy at Heathrop. Is that how you pronounce it, Heathrop?
Yeah, that'll do. Yeah.
That'll do. College across the pond at the University of London. Stephen joins us from his home in Oxford. Welcome to the podcast, Stephen.
Thank you for inviting me.
I have been looking forward to this for so long, because ever since you first came on my radar, when Alvin Plantinga came up with the evolutionary argument against naturalism, and I was just flabbergasted that a person of his stature would ever come up with this strange argument. Could you give the listeners a little rundown on what that argument is?
Sure. Okay. Well, it's the argument has actually changed over time. It's evolved. So I'll give you a sort of classic statement of it. But to be fair to Alvin, he has adapted it in various ways. But I'll give you the sort of fairly basic, well-known version of it, which is that if naturalism is the view that there is no God or anything like God, and that's how Alvin Plantinga understands naturalism, then naturalists will presumably be committed to evolutionary theory as an account of how we have evolved, how we appeared, how our various cognitive faculties such as reason and memory and so on came to be. Now, in order for us to be confident that our beliefs are largely true, we need to be confident that we have reliable cognitive faculties, that we have a fairly reliable memory, that our reasoning ability is pretty reliable, and so on. But according to Plantinga, the combination of naturalism with evolutionary theory should lead us to give a very low probability to the suggestion that we have reliable cognitive faculties. He thinks that given naturalism and evolution, unguided evolution, if that's the situation in which our cognitive faculties appeared, then there's really no particular reason at all to suppose that they're going to be at all truth sensitive. And if that's true, if it's true that we shouldn't be at all confident that we have reliable cognitive faculties, then we shouldn't be confident that any of our beliefs are true, including our belief in naturalism. So, according to Plantinga, the naturalism kind of generates its own defeater, if you like. It becomes a self-defeating philosophical position. Theism, on the other hand, he says, is not self-defeating in that way, because if there's a God who made us in his image, and God, of course, is omniscient, so God will have made us capable of knowledge, he's likely to have ensured that we do have reliable cognitive faculties. Even if we're a product of evolution, God will engineer the situation, will tinker if necessary, in order to ensure that we will evolve with the reliable cognitive faculties. So theism then doesn't lead us to assign a low probability to our having reliable cognitive faculties, but naturalism does. So naturalism is supposedly self-defeating in a way that that theism is not. That's really roughly how the argument goes, or went, at least at one point.
No, so what are the issues with this argument that kind of make it a little less likely to be true?
Well, there's a very obvious response, which of course Plantinga's ready for, but we should look at the response first. So the response is to say that, well, of course we are likely to have evolved reliable cognitive faculties, given naturalism is true, because true belief is much more likely to lead to your survival and successful reproduction than false belief. If you hold a lot of false beliefs, including such beliefs as that jumping off cliffs is safe and so on, then you're likely to end up jumping off a cliff and dying, and then you don't get to pass your genetic material on. Whereas somebody that tends to have true beliefs is going to be much more likely to survive and pass their genetic material on. So, of course, we're going to evolve reliable cognitive faculties if naturalism is true. That's a very obvious counter to the argument. And to that, Plantinga says the following. Well, maybe you just want to have a rest there, and that's a lot to take in, isn't it, in one go? So maybe you want to let's just digest that first. I'll let you come back at me.
Oh, well, in what way? I mean, I think we actually do engage in dangerous behavior. I mean, there are cliff divers, for instance. I mean,
yeah,
it's true, but even the cliff diver knows, there's a possibility I'm going to end up paraplegic or dead. It's a much more complicated situation than Alvin Plantinga makes out.
Yeah. Well, what you need to realize is that really what's driving his argument, or was driving his argument, is something else. It's the thought that if naturalism is true, then our various mental states are causally inert when it comes to behavior. They're not going to be able to have any causal influence on our behavior. That might sound odd to you, but he thinks that if you're committed to naturalism, you really have to give a high probability to that particular thought. And the reason for that is that if naturalism is true, well, then a purely physicalistic, naturalistic account of what causes our behavior will be possible. It'll be possible to explain behavior in terms of, the neurophysiological goings on in your brain and so on. But if you can fully account for our behavior by appealing to the neurophysiological goings on in our brain, then any mental properties that might be correlated with them become completely causally irrelevant. You could take all of the mental stuff away, and everything will carry on the same physically. So Plantinga concludes, if naturalism is true, then some form of what's sometimes called epiphenomenalism is true. That's to say, the mental really is causally inert and can have no causal impact on behavior. And if the mental can't have a causal impact on behavior, if your beliefs can't have any causal impact on your behavior, if they cannot affect your behavior, then given that natural selection in the first instance is selecting for adaptive behavior, so our mental content, our beliefs and so on become irrelevant so far as natural selection is concerned. And there's no particular reason to suppose that natural selection will then favour one kind of belief over another, say true beliefs over false beliefs. So that's really how the argument in its classic form goes. It turns on this philosophical thought that that if naturalism is true, then our mental states really are not going to have any causal clout.
You've got to be kidding.
No, that's it.
Every single action we take is informed by belief. Seriously, he's actually arguing that.
Yeah.
No, God, it's even worse than I.
Yeah, no, that's how the argument goes. Now, it's often misunderstood, the argument, even by people that use it. I mean, Christian apologists, for example, love this argument, but they often get it wrong. So look, the key thought for Plantinga in his sort of classic presentation of the argument is that if naturalism is true, then our mental states won't have any causal effect on our behavior. And if that is true, then natural selection is not going to favor true belief over false belief. It's not going to favor reliable over unreliable cognitive mechanisms. But suppose, for the sake of argument, right, that our mental states did causally impact on our behavior. Well, then there are other problems, suggests Plantinga. Even then, there's still reason to doubt that natural selection will favour true belief. So he tells a story, for example, about an early human or hominid and a saber-toothed tiger, which will obviously eat Paul the hominid if Paul doesn't get out of there sharpish. So Paul needs to run away quickly. Now, one way in which you can get Paul to run away quickly is by giving him the true belief that tigers are dangerous predators and the desire not to be eaten by a dangerous predator. That will get Paul out of there. That will get him to survive and potentially reproduce. But you could also get Paul out of there by giving him a false belief. You could give him the false belief that tigers are cuddly pets, give him a desire to play with cuddly pets, but also give him the belief that the best way to get tigers to play with you is to vigorously run away from them. That too would get you away from the tiger. So it's just as easy to produce adaptive behavior by giving people false beliefs as true beliefs, thinks Plantinga at this point. Now, this particular argument, this has proved more popular with Christian apologists, and you often find this kind of argument wheeled out. But the truth is that actually Plantinga's real argument is not this one about Paul and the tiger. In fact, he places no weight on this additional argument whatsoever when he actually tots up the various probabilities in order to establish the probability that our having reliable cognitive faculties, if naturalism and evolution is true, is low. So there are other bits to the argument that are kind of interesting, but ultimately are sort of bolted on and can easily be dispensed with. And in fact, that bit of the argument, the bit about Paul and the tiger, is much more easily dismissed, I think.
Oh,
so that's it. You've now got a sort of overview of this really quite complicated, argument. Hopefully, you have a fair grasp of what it is now and what it isn't, because it's often misunderstood.
Yeah, I actually learned something from you on this. It just even made it more bizarre. Now, Plantinga doesn't seem to value the role of evidence in forming our beliefs, and as David Hume had said, apportioning our confidence in a belief to the evidence.
No, well, he's not persuaded by evidentialism, Plantinga.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, you're right. So he thinks that in order to know that something is true, you don't necessarily need good evidence that it's true. Now, actually, this I have some sympathy with this. You might be surprised to hear. I mean, so for example, he thinks that if we have reliable perceptual mechanisms which are operating now, and I'm looking around my room and look over there, there's a lamp. Now, if there really is a lamp there, and that lamp is causing me to believe that there's a lamp there by means of, a reliable perceptual mechanism aimed at producing true beliefs, well, then I can know that there's a lamp there. But I don't infer that there's a lamp there, he says, on the basis of evidence. It's not that I'm engaging in some kind of complicated inference to the conclusion that there really must be a lamp there. No, I just believe it there for no other reason than that's just how it strikes me. I don't infer that the thing is there at all. I'm not basing my belief on evidence. So he says that you can know things not based on certainly that kind of evidence, and that there is some plausibility to that view, it seems to me.
Okay, but I have a counter to that. What if you're in a dark room and what's to stop you from believing a lamp is there, but it is turned off? I mean, just because it suits you that a lamp is there doesn't seem to me to be a good way to formulate beliefs. Well,
if it really seems to you, I mean, here's a plausible principle, surely. other things being equal, if it really looks like there's a duck in front of you, then it's reasonable to suppose that there's a duck in front of you. And if it seems very much to you as if there's no duck there, then it's reasonable for you to suppose that there's no duck there.
But is it not evidence? But your visual, it's visual evidence, right? And it's a mundane claim.
No. Well, what we're looking at here is a principle that says what it is reasonable for someone to believe. Now, they may not even know about this principle that I've just given you, or be engaged in any inference at all. It may just seem to them that there's a duck there, hence they believe that there's a duck there, but they're not engaged in any inference whatsoever. So, if that is the case, says Plantinga and others, then it's perfectly reasonable for them to believe that there's a duck there or a lamp on the table and so on. And quite a few philosophers have some sympathy with this view. I have some sympathy with this view. Where I take issue with Plantinga is in the extension that inevitably follows that, well, maybe we have a reliable God sense then. Maybe I don't just have reliable eyes and visual sense and other senses. I have an additional sense, a God sense, a sensus divinitatis, as Calvin called it. And if that's functioning reliably, and if that's aimed at truth, if God has equipped me with one of those, then if it really, really seems to me that there's a God, and God is indeed making himself known to me by some such mechanism, then I can know that God exists even without any evidence, just as I can know that the orange that is on the table in front of me without any evidence. And it's this extension that when I first came across these kind of theories of knowledge, I thought, gosh, the Christians are going to love this, and they really did, because it allows them to say that they may know things, despite the fact that they haven't really got any kind of good argument or evidence to provide in support of what it is that they believe.
What they do, yeah. But it's a circular argument, isn't it? I mean, it's a lot of ifs. If in essence, it ends up being a confirming the consequent in a way.
I don't think it is a circular argument. I think it's a pretty. I think that principle about if it looks like there's a duck there, then other things are equal. It's reasonable to suppose that there's a duck in front of you. I think that's a pretty plausible principle.
That's fine.
And I think it's not implausible to suppose that you could know something just on the basis of having a reliable sensory mechanism operating such that there's an orange on the table and the light bounces off the orange and into your eye and various things happen in your brain, and as a consequence you come to believe that there's an orange there, and if there wasn't an orange there then you wouldn't believe it. If all of those boxes are ticked, then according to many contemporary philosophers working in epistemology and theory of knowledge, then you can know. This is not outrageous, actually.
No, that part isn't.
The outrageous bit,
sensus divinitatis. I mean, what's the sensory mechanism?
Is the switch to then trying to extend this to the sensus divinitatis.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and that's where it gets into this leap of, well, literally epistemological faith to something that we have no. It's just a construct. How you feel about something, however, like a lot of people, I feel God. I know there's a God. What they mean is that they feel it subjectively, and that's the problem.
But that could be, if Plantinga's theory of knowledge is correct, and it might be, and I'm not entirely sure it's wrong or completely wrong, then they could actually know that there's a God, and it could actually be reasonable for them to believe it. So now I don't accept that conclusion. But the reason I don't accept that conclusion is not because I reject all of that epistemology that we've just been through. The reason I reject that conclusion is that actually, if I'm told that I've been given a drug that produces duck hallucinations, so convincing are these duck hallucinations that you'll really believe there's a duck there, right? If I've been given a drug, if I've been told that I've been given such a drug and that it's an extremely effective drug, and I've got very good grounds for thinking that I have been given that drug, and yet it seems to me that there is indeed a duck on the table in front of me, it seems to me unreasonable to just believe that there is a duck on that basis. Not now I've been given this new information about the drug. Okay, once you have good grounds for thinking that the sensory mechanism actually is really not very reliable and often produces false beliefs and may very well be producing a false belief on this occasion, then you should no longer trust its deliverances. And that is exactly the evidence that we have when it comes to the sensus divinitatis. People claim many religious experiences. Some experience a good God, some experience a vengeful God. George Bush experienced a God that wanted him to invade Iraq. Other people experienced a God that wanted the exact opposite to that. Some experience one God, some experience many gods, and so on. There are so many different God beliefs and other beliefs, associated religious beliefs, that these God senses are delivering, that we know that it's unreasonable then to ever take at face value the what appears to be the deliverance of such a mechanism or experience. You should be skeptical, just as you should be skeptical about the appearance of the duck when you have that new information. So it seems to me that even if everything that Plantinga says is true, when it comes to, you don't need evidence to have to know, you don't need evidence to have a reasonable belief. Even if all of that bit is true, and it might be, it doesn't really matter, because the fact is it still isn't reasonable for him to believe in God on the basis of a subjective experience, given we know that such subjective experiences are highly untrustworthy. That's how I would come back at Plantinga.
So in a kind of a weird way, the evolutionary argument against theology is actually more appropriate than than against naturalism.
What do you mean by that? Explain that to me.
It's what you just said is that people have these religious experiences, but this is natural processes that are at work here. I mean, we talk about abnormal brains, but that's just a part of the spectrum of how brains work.
We know that, whatever the cause is, it may be natural, it could even be supernatural, I don't know. Why is it that we're so horribly prone to believing in sort of invisible beings with supernatural powers on the basis of subjective experience? But the fact is, we are. There is no culture that doesn't have a belief in witches or demons or dead ancestors, or whatever it might happen to, spirit beings, whatever it might happen to be, invisible beings with extraordinary powers, right? We are just horribly prone to believing in that on the basis of certain odd subjective experiences. And once you know that, then you should never take such an experience at face value. You should be very critical. In just the same way as, look, if we're going to let Alvin Plantinga get away with that move, we'll have to let the person who thinks that she communicates with your dead relatives to say the same thing, right? We'll have to, as long as it seems to Sally that the dead are communicating with her in some way and that her dead auntie is in the room with her, well then, hey, it's she may know that, and it may be perfectly reasonable for her to believe it. Well, no, I don't think it is perfectly reasonable for her to believe it once she knows that we are horribly prone to false beliefs in such circumstances. And in much the same way, then, Plantinga is not within his rights to continue to believe in God on just the basis of a subjective experience once he knows that we're just horribly prone to believing falsehoods on the basis of such experiences.
So it comes down to what we consider reasonable.
Yeah, well, there are two issues here. There's what can you know, and then there's what can you reasonably believe. And those might be the same, or they may not be. There's some controversy about that now, even in philosophy. But it seems to me that Plantinga, it is certainly not reasonable for Plantinga to continue to believe in God on just that basis, a subjective experience, once he knows how horribly prone we are to false beliefs on that kind of basis. And I think it's highly likely also that he can't be said to know that God exists in such circumstances. But whether or not he can be said to know, he's certainly being irrational.
I have a question. So how does he explain the existence of people who don't believe in the supernatural?
Well, people that don't believe in God, you mean, that don't have the subjective experiences that others do.
I understand what you're saying about cultures as a whole, that usually there's some kind of, but there are obviously individuals within those cultures who just aren't buying it, right? So how does he account for that with this argument?
Well, he accounts for those who don't have the experiences in a very interesting way. Actually, he says that.
Like, do we lack a God gene, or
We're amputated.
It's
We're
worse than that.
amputees.
It's worse than that, I'm afraid. Yeah, no, it's bad news. What you have is a sensus divinitatis that has been corrupted by sin.
Ah, okay.
Sin corrupts the
So
sensus
he's
divinitatis.
made it unfalsifiable.
Yeah, I mean, it's a just so story, isn't it? I mean, how do we know?
It's unfalsifiable.
What evidence is this? Yeah. It is a just so story, but that's his story. Yeah, that's why some people don't enjoy God experiences. It's because their senses has been corrupted by sin. I mean, quite whose sin? I'm not sure. Whether it's your own personal sin that cocks up your sensus divinitatis, or it's just a sin-filled environment that messes it up. A bit like a damp environment stops my car from starting. So perhaps similarly, if I live in a particularly sinful culture, my sensus divinitatis isn't gonna start up properly. I don't know. We'll have to get him to explain all of this.
Yeah, that's going to be my next question. Exactly
okay.
what sins.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh.
Well, Well, if you ask different religious people, they'll say different things. Yeah. Don't ask me. I don't believe any of it.
It just seems to be a house of cards built in the clouds. Like it needs a grounding somewhere, and I don't see the grounding.
No, there's a kind of maybe. Yeah, I think I see what you're getting at. I mean, there's a kind of internally consistent story which is being told
That's
here.
one criterion, yeah.
If there is a God, then he probably will want us to know about him, and he probably will give us a sensus divinitatis, and it probably will be reliable. And then if it is functionally reliable, then we can know that there is a God, if there is a God, and so on. So yeah, and you're in no position to say that I can't know that there is a God on this kind of subjective basis,
Right.
because and so on and so on. So he's telling us kind of a consistent story, but what actually is the evidence that any of this is true is a good question, and I'm not sure that there is any, but I think Plantinga might say it doesn't really matter. All that really matters is that it just seems to me that there's a God, and it may be that I do know that there's a God. If there is a God, then I probably do know that there's a God, and you're in no position to say that I don't know that at this point, or you certainly haven't explained why I don't know. He says. So now just now I gave you some reasons why I think he doesn't know, and certainly it wouldn't be rational for him to believe on that.
Yeah, that's what I mean by being circular. It's internally consistent, but it's not grounded in anything objective.
Yeah,
That's
Now that is
what I mean.
something you come across a lot, isn't it? I mean, it's like conspiracy theories.
Yes.
They often have that character, don't they?
Exactly.
Or someone that's, if you've ever met someone that's suffering from a particularly severe form of schizophrenia, and they've managed to convince themselves that dogs are spies from the planet Venus or something equally ludicrous, they can tell a story that is internally consistent. I mean, these people are often very, very intelligent, and they will come up with the most ingenious explanations for why it is that we can't find any evidence for the dogs being Martian secret agents. They hide their Martian technology from us. They can speak, but they choose not to speak when we're in the room. We can't detect any signals coming from the dogs going to Mars, but that's because they're using technology that's beyond our ability to detect it, and so on. In this way, you can just endlessly defend your theory, and obviously, when you see that going on, you should be very suspicious. It's a hallmark of a bullshit belief. Yeah.
Oh, this is fun. My brain was hurting for a while there, but this is really interesting look at a.
Yeah, well, you started me off on the really technical stuff. You see.
I shouldn't have done that. I should have started on the public awareness stuff, because one of your aims in your career is relating philosophy to the general public. At least it seems to me. I mean, you've written a number of books on this, The Great Philosophers, which I just bought and downloaded because it's. I'm not well versed in philosophy, and I do want to learn about it. In fact, I've been thinking about taking. I'm versed in political philosophy, but not philosophy. And it's something that I'm interested in because it is, well, it's fun. First of all, I mean, you guys get paid to have fun. That's terrible. I actually have to do work.
Yeah.
And
the worst we get is a headache.
Yeah. Well, but you guys get to continue your work in the bar, so that's good.
Yeah,
over
armchair.
plant.
Yeah, it's armchair. We're called armchair philosophers, and so you can just sit in your armchair.
I wouldn't be an
close your
armchair.
eyes.
I wouldn't.
And
be
it
an
looks like
philosopher.
you're just having a little sleep, but you're actually doing cutting edge work.
I'd be more of the
Hopefully
Dean
with a
Martin
nice
style.
glass of brandy in your hand.
Well, that's what I mean. I'd be a Dean Martin style of philosopher, because it's way more fun. But tell us a little bit about how we can relate philosophy to the public bar. I mean, I know philosophy's taken a bit of a bad rap lately. I mean, people like a friend of mine, Lawrence Krauss, has who's going to be on the podcast fairly soon, kind of took a snipe at philosophy. I understand what he's getting at. I mean, I just mentioned it. It was this grounding that's necessary, and I think ungrounded philosophy is kind of a pie in the sky a bit. But the general public needs to learn how to think. I mean, philosophy is which is what it is, right? It's there's
I mean, if you want me to give you an advert for philosophy,
absolutely,
or a couple of adverts for why it's a good idea to expose young people in particular, I think, to a bit of philosophy early on. First of all, encouraging people to think and question the beliefs that they bring with them, into the classroom, is a very good idea, in part because it means that they don't end up moral sheep. They don't just end up believing what everyone else believes and accepting it in a more or less uncritical way. The problem with the society of moral sheep is it can be led down a very dark alley by some charismatic leader.
Trump.
They become they're very prone to being led astray because they don't have the critical defenses that they need to resist, being radicalized in one way or another. So people often think that the best way to protect people against being radicalized and indoctrinated by a cult or whatever it is, well, let's get our own indoctrination in first, right? But actually the best defense is to raise people to have some immunity to indoctrination. And one of the best ways you can do that is to raise people to have a little bit of philosophical, give them a little bit of some intellectual self-defense skills, which is what philosophy provides. There's also, another reason to expose kids to philosophy is that there's been research done into the backgrounds of those who, for example, rescued Jews during the Holocaust. It's been claimed that the people that did the rescuing did so because they were religious, but actually the evidence does not really bear that out. Religion might have had some small effect, but what really marked out the rescuers from the non-rescuers is that the rescuers had been raised in a non-authoritarian way, had been raised to think critically and independently and make their own judgments rather than just passively accept whatever they had been told. So it seems to me that raising citizens in a philosophical way, in that kind of way, to be autonomous critical thinkers and make their own moral judgments, not just passively defer to whatever the Pope or their local Communist Party official tells them. Doing that, raising kids in that way, is our best defense against the kind of moral catastrophes that marred the 20th century. So I think there's a moral case even for encouraging philosophy in schools. It's also educationally extremely potent. I mean, if you look at the graduate record exam results of, which is what the Americans sit in their third year if they want to go to grad school, they sit the GRE, and it's got three components: a maths component, linguistic component, and a kind of a logical reasoning component, critical thinking component. Somebody took the time to look at 50 different degree programs, including philosophy and physics and business administration and accountancy and history and so on, to see how well the students did on the GRE test. And if you want to I mean, the thing about the GRE test is it's a good test of general all-round smarts, right? I mean, these are highly transferable skills, being able to sort of reason mathematically and logically and have some linguistic ability. These are the kind of skills that employers are going to be particularly keen on having. So what philosophy degrees come out top of the GRE? Philosophy and physics. They rule the GRE. Philosophy comes top on 2 out of the 3 scores out of 50 degree programs. Physics comes top on the maths one. The problem we've got now is that people are increasingly feeling pressured to do degrees that have a kind of career path obviously associated with them. If you're going to invest so much money in a degree, well, maybe you should do accountancy or business administration or something like that. Something where you can see that there's a job waiting for you at the end of it. But if you look at the GRE scores of the people that do accountancy and business administration, you will be very disappointed.
Yeah.
They are well down the scale. They are some of the poorest performing degree programs. So it seems to me that, there's also a very good case for just exposing people to philosophy and philosophical thinking skills, because it just gives them good general smarts and intelligence. Now, of course, not everyone wants a population that has those kind of skills. They may worry that there will be a revolution, or
maybe it's needed.
They'll all out of control. Yeah.
I mean,
but it seems to me that those are exactly the kind of citizens that we need for moral reasons, for intellectual reasons, and so on.
Now,
what do you think of the education system in the U.S.? Do you think there's sort of some, sometimes I wonder, is there a deliberate effort to dumb down the population, right? To make them more compliant and... Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know, to be honest. But certainly it's not brilliant, is it? I mean, we do know that. And in fact, things are only getting worse in the UK, I think, really. The thing about, just to get back to Lawrence Krauss, who he mentioned was going to be on the program. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, he's suspicious about philosophy, and I know many scientists who are suspicious about philosophy, and the reason for that is actually not a bad reason. It's that if you want to find out about reality, presumably you need to look at it in one way or another, right? You need to observe, you need to perform experiments, you need data, evidence. I mean, how else are you going to find out about the world around us other than by using your senses and engaging perhaps the scientific method? But what philosophers do is they sit in their armchairs with their eyes closed and they just have a good think. Now, how could you possibly find out anything about reality by just sitting in your armchair with your eyes closed and having a good think? You can't. I mean, there is no miraculous mechanism that's going to allow you to discover facts about the world around you if you just sit there with your fingers in your ears having a good old think. You've just cut yourself off from the only mechanisms that are likely to be able to deliver you with knowledge. So surely then philosophy is a waste of time. So now I can, I understand that argument, but that's not what I think philosophy is.
Yeah.
I think that I don't think that philosophy is about finding out about the metaphysical structure of reality or anything like that. What I think philosophy is conceptual engineering or conceptual clarification, for at least to a large extent. So some problems are just conceptual problems. If you're doing Sudoku or something like that, you don't have to go and do an experiment. You can just figure it out in your head. There are plenty of problems which are essentially conceptual in nature. If I ask you, is your auntie's first cousin's wife the blah, 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 I'll give you some long string of concepts. You will be able to figure it out, but you'll be able to do it from the comfort of your armchair, just by unpacking the various concepts and seeing the connections between them. And it may be that philosophy is to a large extent just that. It's about conceptual work, and in particular dealing with conceptual problems that seem to crop up. So there's a sort of conceptual obstacle to identifying consciousness with the brain, for example. not a scientific obstacle. There seems to be some sort of conceptual block there. And if you want to get over that conceptual hurdle, you'll need to do conceptual work, sitting in your armchair having a good think, to figure out that why there really isn't a conceptual obstacle. There merely appeared to be, for example. So it seems to me that I'll give you an example. So that's what you need, isn't it? An example.
Yes.
So here's a puzzle, right? That's supposed to go back all the way back to ancient Greece and Heraclitus. Can you jump in the same river twice? Now you might argue like this, and some people think Heraclitus did. If you jump in the river and you get out, and then you jump in a second time, then the river will have changed in various ways. So it won't be the same as it was before. But if it is not the same river, then the number of rivers you have jumped into is not one, it is two. So you can't jump into one and the same river twice over. And in fact, it doesn't matter how quickly you jump in the second time, it'll still be a new river. It won't be the same. And there's another reason why you can't jump in the same river twice. It won't be you that jumps in, because you will have changed. You won't be the same. So it won't be the same person. So the number of people that will be jumping in is two. Now, if you push this logic to its final conclusion, you end up having to say that, the person that starts this sentence isn't the person that finishes it, and so on, which is ludicrous. But that's where the logic seems to lead us. So this is a classic philosophical paradox. How do we solve it? In the following way, it just requires you to realize that the words "the same" are being used in two different ways. The argument trades on an ambiguity. We move from what's known as qualitative sameness, where you might have two objects which are exactly the same in all of their properties. You might have two billiard balls, for example, which are both white and round and identical down to down to a molecular level, indistinguishable, and yet the number of balls is two. So they are not numerically identical, but they are qualitatively identical. And then you can take one object, one of those balls, and you can make a little mark on it, and then you have one ball which has qualitatively changed. It's not qualitatively the same it was before, but it is numerically one and the same ball. Once you've made that distinction, you can see that the argument for why you can't jump in the same river twice just trades on an ambiguity. You slide from, it's not the same river qualitatively, to it's not the same river numerically. And once you've spotted that, once you've done that conceptual clarification, you realize that the absurd metaphysical theory that the number of people that say this, involved in saying this sentence is almost infinite, is just a mistake. It's just a product of linguistic and conceptual confusion.
It's a false equivalence, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's what philosophers do, so far as I'm concerned. We untie the knots, the conceptual knots and tangles, insofar as they can be untied, that philosophical problems usually are. That's usually their character. They usually have that character to them. It seems that even when all of the scientific facts are in, we're still kind of stuck. But how could you jump in the same river twice? Even if I know everything that goes on in rivers down to the last molecule, I am no nearer being able to solve the puzzle. The only way to solve the puzzle is to sit down, close your eyes, and just think it out. So actually you can make massive philosophical progress. There is philosophical progress. There are philosophical discoveries. There are philosophical problems which have been solved. We just solved one. It's a worthwhile activity. It's just not what science does. But that doesn't mean that it's without value.
I totally agree, yeah. You also are editor of Think, which is the Royal Institute of Philosophy's journal. Dedicated.
Yes.
That's dedicated towards the public understanding of philosophy, is it not?
Yeah, it's the strap title is Philosophy for Everyone. Yeah, it comes out 3 times a year.
Oh, cool.
And we get really good philosophers writing, but they have to write. The rule is they have to write in a very accessible way, and hopefully, a relevant way as well. So you find that lots of ordinary members of the public subscribe to this.
Yeah, I think I might just do that myself. Yeah. Yeah, I just learned about this. So, and one of the things that you talked about is scientism. I want to seg into that in this journal as well. Scientism is a word that's kind of become almost a pejorative. Well, not almost a pejorative. It is a pejorative. Some people like Alex Rosenberg want to embrace it. I'm not sure he's wrong, because this idea that science can answer everything, and of course it can't. But it does deal with objective claims. It can't tell me whether I should prefer Beethoven over Mozart. By the way, I do prefer Beethoven and Mozart, and I think I can create a cogent argument why. But somebody else is going to argue with me and say that Mozart is better. I mean, this is not a scientific question. That's what would you call it? It's certainly subjective.
Yeah, partly subjective, certainly. Yeah. I think that there are questions science can't answer. They're not just. They don't just have that subject. They don't always have that subjective character, though. I mean, the question of why there is something rather than nothing, for example, on the face of it, science will never be able to answer that question, because science answers questions by it explains things by appealing to laws of nature or causes which science has identified. But if you're asking then, well, why are there any laws of nature at all? That method of explanation can no longer apply. That kind of, in which case it's going to be a question that science can't answer.
Well, whenever
you point to something and say that is the thing, I mean, there's a more general problem actually, which is whenever you point to something and say, oh, that's the thing that explains why there's something rather than nothing. Well, you've just pointed to some more something.
Yes, that's true. But I would come back saying that, well, is why a valid question at all? I mean, syntactically it is.
Yeah.
But...
Well, yeah, and then you're doing philosophy, aren't you?
Yes. So scientists like Lawrence Krauss do actually engage in philosophy. Sorry, Lawrence.
I was thinking that, for somebody who slags science so much, sure, I participated in a lot.
Yeah.
And of course, skepticism is a branch of philosophy too, right? So.
Well, absolutely, yeah.
Well, there are two things that go by the name skepticism. So there's philosophical skepticism, so a skepticism about the external world, for example. How do I know that this is real rather than the Matrix? That's called skepticism. The suggestion then is that we don't know things that we think we know. But then there's also, in the free thought movement, the word skepticism gets used in another way, where the suggestion is that you shouldn't just accept claims about the supernatural and so on at face value or on the basis of flimsy evidence. These claims really need to be properly investigated, and we need more than just anecdotes and so on before we believe stuff. And so I'm certainly signing up to skepticism in that sense. Yeah, I know I would defend that.
Yeah. So getting back to scientism, what are your thoughts on that?
Scientism. So in my article on scientism, I suggest that it's become a term of abuse, a bit like communism used to be.
Yeah, definitely.
It's just a way of usually inaccurately dismissing a position. It's a smear. So, for example, people will accuse Richard Dawkins in his argument that he presents in The God Delusion, he will say, well, that's just scientism. What Richard Dawkins needs to realise is that there are more things in heaven and hell than are dreamt of in his philosophy. And, he should show a little humility and allow that there may be things beyond his understanding. That's just a bullshit response as far as I'm concerned, because whilst I am more than happy to acknowledge that there may well be things which are forever beyond our understanding. And it may well be that certain things, certain questions can never be answered by us. It doesn't follow from that supernatural stuff and gods and so on are off limits to science and reason. And in fact, they are not. Just because they're unobservable doesn't make them off limits to science. I mean, science investigates subatomic particles which are unobservable. Science investigates the distant past of this planet, which is unobservable. It's been and gone. It can never come back. We have theories about the distant past of this planet and subatomic particles, which are well confirmed. Other theories we have about these things, which have been disproved scientifically. Why is that? Well, because these claims, which concern the unobserved, have empirical consequences. And that's also true of many supernatural claims. Supernatural claims may concern unobserved beings, gods and ghosts and whatever. That doesn't mean that these things are off limits to science any more than quarks are, or the distant past of this planet is. If you believe in a god, for example, that is all powerful and all evil, you face seemingly overwhelming empirical evidence against your belief, because look around you. There's too much love, laughter, ice cream, and rainbows for this possibly to be the creation of such a supernatural being. We may not know why the universe exists. I'll show a little humility here and admit that perhaps this is a question we'll never answer. But even if I don't know the answer, I can know that one particular answer is wrong. It is not the creation of a supremely malevolent deity, and we all know that. And so that's one supernatural being ruled out on the basis of observation. And if you can do that with an evil god, you could do it with the good god too.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah.
So you're not you don't agree with Stephen Jay Gould on the NOMA principle then?
No, I don't. No. So
Yeah.
the overlapping magisteria.
Yeah.
So he thought that science and religion were non-overlapping magisteria, as he put it. That science deals in the age of rocks, and religion the rock of ages, and they should keep out of each other's territory. When religious people start telling us about the age of rocks, we end up in trouble. And when scientists start telling us, as you know, and when scientists start telling us about meaning and significance and morality and religious stuff, then it's out of its proper zone of investigation. So that was the Stephen Jay Gould view. It's not my view. I think it's pretty clear that many supernatural claims can be scientifically investigated. I mean, they have been. I mean, the power of petitionary prayer has been investigated several times over now. I mean,
by believers.
And the Bible makes claims that are empirical, right?
Yeah, of course it does. Yeah, so those can be refuted too. So we know there's no God who created the world in 6 days, just over 6,000 years ago, for example. You can cross that God off your list. Even if you don't know why the universe exists, you can quite reasonably rule that answer out. People often think that if you don't know the answer to a question, well, then you have to accept that all of these answers could be true. But no, you don't know that. I mean, if Sherlock Holmes is having a bad day and he doesn't know who done it, he could still be pretty damn certain the butler didn't, if the butler was in the room with Holmes at the time the murder was committed and has a cast-iron alibi. Just because I don't know why the universe exists doesn't mean that I can't quite reasonably rule out the Judeo-Christian God as an explanation for it. And in fact, I can.
Well, that's the thing, that people are so afraid to say I don't know, because they want to have an answer that's positive instead of one that is nebulous, and they fall for the appeals to ignorance, that kind of thing. And it's not something we like. I don't like saying I don't know. I hate not knowing. But
well, and too, they provide justification. So 6 days doesn't mean 6 days anymore. It means some other measurement of time, right?
Yes, of course.
It's kind of bending over backwards apologetics.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Well, when a claim appears to have been refuted, well, you just reinterpret it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, you do that with Nostradamus and so on, can't you? It's the same basic recipe that you follow in each case. It looks like a claim is made. Oh dear, it's not true. Oh well, that can't have been what they meant then. It must have meant something else, and so on. Yeah. Well,
how do you keep people from doing that? I mean, it's something that's because people are emotionally invested in an argument. They really big on Nostradamus. They'll want to do that, but how does one say, look, you got to stop doing that and just accept that maybe this is not true?
That is a very, very good question. And the fact is that if you come at these people, be they conspiracy theorists or young earth creationists or whatever, if you come at them head on with arguments, they are more than ready for you. They are often more skilled than you are in terms of, the rhetoric and debate tactics and so on, and they will very quickly tie you up in knots. So I don't think that's the best strategy normally. I think the best strategy is to say, oh, look over there. Those people are clearly nuts, aren't they? Look at what they believe. And notice the various strategies that they're adopting in order to convince themselves that what they believe is reasonable. And then look at these other people, look at the strategies that they're adopting in order to convince themselves that what they believe and what we can clearly see is ludicrous is nevertheless reasonable. If you once people start to look around them and see that actually what those other people doing can't possibly be called science or indeed reasonable, if they then begin to spot that they are themselves thinking in exactly the same ways, that the same telltale signs of an intellectual black hole, if you like, are there, then I think that's probably the best way of getting them out.
Oh, that's interesting.
You don't go. You sneak round the back rather than come at them from the. They're well fortified at the front. You got to kind of you got to be sneaky.
So it's basically like I'm going to put this in a glib manner, and that is, I'm an atheist for this about your God for the same reason you're an atheist about all these other gods. In essence.
That's not a bad. That's a kind of an example of it. Yeah. Although what I really had in mind was that was more that there are certain. So I wrote this book called Believing Bullshit, which I identify 8 mechanisms or key signs that someone has been sucked into a kind of intellectual black hole. So you cross the event horizon and there ain't no coming out. You become an intellectual prisoner of this bubble of belief. So cults and conspiracy theories and religions and so on, they often have this character. The people inside, trapped inside, they think that they're the rational and reasonable ones, but and you can only feel sorry for them. And the truth is that no matter how hard you try and persuade them that they're mistaken, they ain't going to be coming out. They are trapped there forever. They've got themselves caught into certain habits of thought, sort of self-perpetuation. It becomes a self-perpetuating bubble of belief from which there is no escape. So I think that the most important thing really is that we all be aware of what the warning signs are, so that as you approach one of these belief systems, you're wandering down the high street and somebody with wide eyes comes at you with a leaflet and says, "Have you heard the truth?" And thrusts it into your hand. That you should be, red light should be coming on in your head at that point. And you should be on your guard, because you may be skirting perilously close to an intellectual black hole, and it will suck you in unless you're very wary. So I think people need to know, young people in particular should be aware of the warning signs. I don't want my daughters to be trapped in a mental prison like that, and unless they have some intellectual defenses, they could very easily be.
That's it. I'm going to have to read that one. Kirsty, you had something. You were going to say something. Or were you?
Yes? I don't know if I should bring it up, but it would seem to me that certain movements do kind of, I guess, embody that. I was just reading the article today, Randy, about this other school that has yet shut down another speaker, and the way they're conducting themselves. And, would that be sort of an example of buying into uncritically?
They don't want to hear new ideas that counter their own.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think so. Certainly, yeah. There you can. It's not that they're all politically on the left or all politically on the right. You find these kind of belief systems everywhere, including in the political sphere, or everywhere. What was I going to say? I had something to say about that, and it's popped out of my head. But yeah, I know what you mean. There are degrees to which belief systems can become like intellectual black holes. I mean, the fact is that we're all horribly prone to confirmation bias. We're all much more prone to peer pressure when it comes to what we believe than we would. Certainly, most of us are aware. There are causal mechanisms operating on us, influencing what we believe, which are largely below our radar. We don't even know what's really going on. I think I believe that men and women have equal rights because I've thought about it carefully, and I've come to a reasonable conclusion. But the fact is, I may well hold that belief because I just hang out with a bunch of liberal people, and it would be very uncomfortable for me to express anything other than that kind of view. You know, peer pressure is a very powerful tool. So we're all rather less rational than we'd like to be, or like to think of ourselves as being, I think. But the extent to which, you know, it's a matter of degree. Our best defense against being sucked into these kind of belief systems is to know the warning signs and be a good critical thinker, and ask, you know, why should I think that? What is the evidence for that? And if people are doing that, then I think they have a reasonable shot at surviving. And so, you know, that's what I've forgotten where I'm going with this conversation now. But anyway, I'm coming back to the point that it's very important that young people have some immunity to these kinds of belief systems, be they political or religious or whatever.
As opposed to just accepting.
I was actually going to
them
say
face value.
immunization theory. I can't remember the scholar who put that forth, but yeah.
Yeah, immunity. It's we need to immunize people against bullshit. And unfortunately, people seem to be becoming increasingly prone to it. I mean, what's interesting really is that there's been research done to suggest that actually, if you just so there's been research into, for example, the extent to which people are prone to confirmation bias, the extent to which they will seize on anything that seems to support their belief and tend to dismiss things that don't support their belief, whatever their belief might happen to be, you know, gun control or that Jesus is Lord or whatever it might happen to be. And what the research showed was that when it comes to, for example, some sort of mathematical evidence, mathematicians are more prone to confirmation bias when it comes to that kind of evidence than are those that don't have any particular skill in maths. In other words, becoming more skilled in maths makes it more likely that you will find ways to gerrymander the evidence mathematically and convince yourself that this data really does support whatever it was that you'd already decided it was true. You're more likely to be able to do that if you've got mathematical skills than otherwise. So the worry is that the concern would be that if you want to prevent people from becoming or from being so prone to confirmation bias, maybe the thing that you should be doing is not giving them those kind of intellectual skills if they're just going to use them to gerrymander the data and fix things in such a way that they can carry on believing whatever it was that they already believed was true. I think I think that's why philosophy is important, because philosophers encourage you to question what you already believe, to subject it to critical scrutiny. It's that attitude that's really most important. That's more important than just having intellectual ability and being able to follow a complex line of reasoning or something like that. The really important thing is being prepared to honestly look at your own beliefs in an unvarnished way and ask yourself, is this really true? Why do I believe it? What are the best possible counter arguments to this, and so on? And it's that attitude that we should be encouraging.
People need to look at the disconfirming evidence as well.
Sorry, say again?
So people need to look at the disconfirming evidence just as importantly as to look at the evidence for the position.
Of course, yes, yeah. I mean, that's the bottom line, isn't it? When it comes to confirmation bias, we count the hits and ignore the misses. Yeah, you got to count the misses too. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was reminded of Denton. I can't remember his first name. Denton, who did the mathematical justification to support intelligent design and this sort of thing, right?
Dembski, you mean?
A weapon. Sorry.
Dembski. You're talking about.
Dembski,
yes.
Yeah.
I'm not expert on that, but yes, I mean, the fact is that being very, very clever does not necessarily give you much immunity, and being highly educated doesn't necessarily give you much immunity to bullshit. In fact, in some ways, it may make you more vulnerable. Arthur Conan Doyle, who created the world's quintessentially rational character, Sherlock Holmes, Arthur Conan Doyle believed in fairies. Was successfully hoaxed by two little girls with some.
Oh yes,
who
I
had
know the case. Yeah.
with a film
The
camera and
pictures,
some
yeah.
paper cutouts. And he believed all sorts of other completely ridiculous things. He was a very intelligent
Seances.
man, extremely well educated, but got sucked into believing, really ridiculous things. I mean, there are people in the United States of America much cleverer than I that believe the entire universe is 6,000 years old. Their smarts, their intelligence has not prevented them from falling foul of that ridiculous myth. And so, it's not enough that we be smart and intelligent. We also need to have a very healthy skeptical attitude encouraged in us from a young age. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's kind of ironic that Conan Doyle believed in, he attended seances regularly. But the rational part of him was a fantasy.
Yeah.
It's kind of an ironic, unfortunately ironic. I would much prefer it was the other way. But say like Tolkien or that kind of thing. But, yeah.
Well, Newton held some pretty bad shit crazy.
Oh yeah,
ideas, too.
The Alchemist. Well, he was a theologian first, right? He was, and he was a heretic. I mean, if religious authority had known of his true beliefs, his friends were very clear. Don't go talking about this. He might have ended up, his life might have ended up cut short more than it already was. But so, any questions, Chris? This has been totally enjoyable, by the way. This has been awesome.
Yeah,
we're going to have you on again.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. No, I'm very happy to talk about this stuff. So yeah, if you want me back again, that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say thank you so much. And is there anything that you'd like to promote or talk about your working on?
You have a blog.
I want people to rush out and buy all my books.
Yes,
obviously.
which I'm doing right now. Actually, I'm on Amazon at the moment.
And then I did this Evil God challenge video. I've got this book coming out with OUP, which I haven't even written yet. Oxford University Press book on the Evil God challenge, which is kind of a big argument for atheism. That's going to be coming out
Sounds like fun, actually.
in a couple of years. But in the meantime, I've got this animation, which I think you've seen. The best quality version is on Vimeo, and it's already had 250,000 views on Vimeo. So if you can get that some traffic, I would be very grateful.
Whoops. Where's that coming
We can
from?
post a link.
I don't know where that's coming from.
It's
not
on
me.
mine. This is Hotmail and their Skype beta thing, and it was actually you calling Stephen. And for some reason, it's like, it's weird. I don't understand it, and yeah.
I had
Thank
no
you,
idea.
Microsoft. No, I know it wasn't you. It was Microsoft. Okay, there we go.
Okay.
Yeah, totally. It's been so enjoyable. If I come to Britain, we have to have a pint or two. I mean, I've got because we're actually planning on doing that next year or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, let me know.
I'd love
Keep
to
in
do
touch.
that. Absolutely, yeah.
Yes.
And we can philosophize over actual real pints, pints of real beer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I assume the beer is better over there than it is over here.
Well,
No?
Yeah, it depends what you like. Depends what you like. I mean, personally, I prefer the kind of cold German stuff. The chili lagers and rather than the sort of lukewarm brown liquid which we're associated with. Yeah.
Oh.
But if you like that kind of thing, that's fine.
I don't know. I don't know if I do or not. I mean,
I generally won't order a pint of bitter, to be honest. I can take it or leave it.
I don't know if I ever had a bitter.
Yeah, that's the thing to get. If you come over, we'll make you drink one.
Oh, absolutely. Well, yeah, it's like every once in a blue moon, I have to have McEwen's because just to remember why I don't drink McEwen's. You can't get McEwen's in Saskatchewan. There's a trade war going on between Scotland and Saskatchewan. Britain I think, yeah, it might have been over the Saskatoon berries. Britain didn't allow Saskatoon berries, which are basically blueberries.
Right.
A little bit sweeter, smaller, because they hadn't been tested, even though like millions of pies have been consumed. It's just outrageous, these trade war things, and over stupid berry. And so they retaliated with, nope, we're not going to import McEwen's.
Fair enough.
It's only in Saskatchewan. It's only next door.
I can only apologize for my stupid country. Sorry.
I don't know what's... well, we just signed a trade deal with the EU, but now that Britain is leaving the EU... Oh, well.
Yeah, well,
maybe.
We'll
maybe. Yeah. Well, thanks for being on, Stephen, and we'll let you go. I guess it's evening there.
It's
thank you.
it's 9:20, just coming up. Yeah,
oh, that's good.
So no, thank you, and So
it's been wonderful. We're going to have you on again.
I hope it was. I think we probably shouldn't have started with the evolutionary argument.
Yeah, that was my fault, obviously.
It's such a nightmare to explain it. Anyway,
I just think it's so funny.
Slightly better understanding now. Yeah.
Yeah,
so good.
Absolutely. Especially.
We'll give it a really clickbaity title.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay. See you.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye. Oh, that was cool.